as you may know, it's a challenge to tell a good story. And the main reasons why it's a challenge to tell a good story is because quite often speakers, when telling stories, forget about conflict. Conflict. Conflict's a very important thing because conflict makes your story. There's no conflict, there's no story. So the question is, how do you create conflict? Well, you could try to create conflict in some sort of narration. He said this, and he thought that maybe that was something else, and then something else was going on, and you just kind of narrate things in a way that creates some sort of conflict or issue. Problem about that is that it's boring. Now, the simplest way, the best way to create conflict in a story is through dialogue. It's all about dialogue, and dialogue is back and forth. Somebody says something, somebody else replies. Somebody says something, somebody else replies. But if they just went back and forth like that, if your characters in the story just go back and forth, I say this, you say that, I say this, you say that, and there's no conflict, it becomes a boring story. For example, hey, Bob, isn't it a great day? Yeah, Joe, it's a great day. Bob, you're right, it's a really great day. Joe, what a wonderful day this is. Bob, fantastic day, right? Joe, you couldn't be righter. That's dialogue there that's going to put any audience to sleep. And some of them may start running for the exits. If you have some sort of a conflict, some sort of a simple conflict, then you've got the beginning of the story. Hey, Bob, isn't it a great day? Joe, what makes today so great? Okay. You've got the beginnings of some sort of conflict, and that's going to drive the story. That's going to make the story more interesting. So how do you create conflict? Well, there's different ways to create conflict. And today you're going to find out about 3 of them. There's one that you probably already know about. Very simple, very basic. But there are 2 others maybe you haven't thought about. The basic one is just the nature of conflict. It's what happens when you have a conflict. Sort of thing that goes on. It's a simple thing and a powerful thing. And you can use it a little bit. But after a point, that conflict may become like the back and forth with Joe and Bob with no issue. That's really got to be developed. For that, you take a look at the other 2 that you're going to find out about. The first one is something that happens all the time in discussions. Even without meaning to. It happens all the time. And it goes back and forth. It creates incredible conflict. Even the best friends can have this sort of thing go back and forth and back and forth. And the final type of conflict is something that people who use it are very particular people. There are certain people who use this type of conflict. And maybe it's not something you use at all. You think, well, Tim, that doesn't really work for me, but it will work for your characters. Even if you don't use it, it's familiar enough type of conflict that you can put it in your story and people will recognize it and say, oh yeah, I know that type of conflict. I know what that is. And use it. And once you start telling stories that have conflict, and you start using these 3 different methods to really kind of develop and build that conflict, you'll notice your story is coming alive. You notice a lifeless story suddenly will take on life and take on interest. And you'll know that because the next time you give it to the audience, you'll see it in their eyes. All of a sudden, instead of being like, oh boy, another one of these back and forth, isn't it great type of stories, suddenly when that conflict starts rising up, your audience will think, hey, something here. And maybe someone will even lean forward a little bit. And you'll see that as they're paying attention more. When that happens, you get a new sense of confidence on stage. You understand what's going on. You're thinking, hey, all right, this is going well. Because when the audience starts responding, you start feeling more confident, start feeling better, and you start speaking better. So by creating conflict and using these 3 types of conflict and dialogue in your stories, you put yourself more at ease, you make your audience happier. It'll be a win-win for you all. first type of conflict is just the very nature of conflict itself. As mentioned, it's something that you probably have already thought about. It's probably kind of already natural. Indeed, it might be something you normally do in any type of dialogue. That Joe and Bob dialogue where everything is fine, you're just agreeing, just doesn't seem to be normal. Maybe you do this sort of thing. It's simple, but it's something to be aware of, because once you're aware of this type of conflict, you can start to use it. So instead of it just kind of happening like, oh, that just kind of happened, that sort of works, you can say, okay, I'm going to look for this type of conflict, I'm going to create this type of conflict, and see where it goes. The nice thing about this conflict is that naturally it will grow a little bit, will develop a little bit, and be very useful in your dialogue and your stories. And that conflict simply is resistance. Resistance. Quite often when somebody suggests something, the other person will immediately say, yeah, let's do that. Some way or another, that person resists. They'll say, well, let's think about it. I say, why should we do that? Or some other way they'll find to resist. Sometimes it's because they feel like they're being pushed into something they don't want to do. That can be the basis of the resistance. So somebody says, hey, come on down to the store. Got something there that I think you're going to be interested in. Say, no, I really don't want to go down to the store today. I want to stay right here. I'm fine where I am. Oh, come on down to the store. It's really great. I promise you'll love it. Like, I've been down to the store before, not interested in that. Resistance. So you just resist back and forth, and that can be a source of conflict. Sometimes you resist just to get a little bit more time to think about it. So when somebody says, hey, come on, let's do this. Like, let me think about that. I don't know if I want to do that. Oh, come on, do it now. Now, maybe I'll do it, but at least think a little bit about it more. And that's another type of resistance. Or the other person might do it, but right now they want a little bit more time to think about it. Have you been in that situation before? Where someone just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing at you and saying, come on, do it now. You're thinking, hey, give me a break. Let me take a breather on this. Let me think about it a little bit before I commit myself. You had those situations? Yeah. Or maybe you were on the other side. You had this really great idea and you couldn't understand why the person didn't immediately jump on it. Hey, I got this hot opportunity for you. Come on. Do it now. However it works out, it's just a different type of resistance. Whether it's resistance because somebody is thinking, let me think about it, or it's resistance because somebody just flat out doesn't want to do it, it's a resistance. And that conflict will build the dialogue back and forth. Somebody says something, the other person resists, and there's this natural tension created that, of course, has to be resolved. So, resistance is something to use. And it's very effective. Just using resistance in your dialogue can create that conflict that you need, and you can have some nice back and forth of just somebody saying, do this, the person saying, I don't really want to. Oh, come on, go ahead. No, I really don't think I want it. Come on. Back and forth. However, if you only use resistance, the other person says yes, yes, and the other person just says no, the conflict really doesn't build. And if you want to create good conflict in your dialogue, it needs to build. Just start out where it is, and then build, develop, and grow from there as this resistance increases. So while basic resistance is okay, you want to build that conflict. And as you start thinking about building the conflict, you start thinking about in conversations that you've had or situations you've been in. And if you think about those situations, you might be aware of this next type of conflict. This next type of conflict is a little bit more than resistance, and it naturally builds. It naturally builds because it's just what people kind of automatically do when they're going back and forth in a dialogue and they get into a conflict. The basis of any conflict is some type of resistance. So in dialogue, it's someone saying yes and the other person saying no. That creates a conflict, that creates a tension that needs to be resolved. But if someone just says yes and the other person says no, from a story point of view, it pretty soon becomes uninteresting. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Very quickly the audience gets it, and you've got a situation called a stalemate. You may have heard of that. Stalemate, which means nobody wins. Somebody says yes, the other says no, and there's not really driving towards anything. So you want to build a conflict. You want to build a conflict back and forth. So to build conflict, there's one method that's really particularly powerful. It's powerful, it's done all the time in back and forth, in rivalries, and it's really effective in dialogue. And that is one-upping. One-upping. That's where somebody says something, and the other person tries to make it a little bit more. So somebody says something nasty, the other person tries to be even nastier. And then in reply, the other one tries to be even nastier than that. Or someone says they're going to do something, the other person says they're going to do something better. The other person says, well, they're going to do something better. So it becomes this competition, this one-upping back and forth of who's going to be one to win this argument. And the great thing about one-upping from a conflict nature, from a conflict point of view, is that it naturally builds. There's automatically a competition in one-upping. So it's like an auction. Somebody bids $10 and the other one one-ups that. $11, okay, $12, $13, $14, $15, $16, $20, $50, $100, and on and up it goes. And that builds the conflict. So might say, Bob, you know, I've been thinking this for a while. You know, your nose is kind of funny looking. Oh yeah, Joe? Well, your face is kind of funny looking. Oh, really, Bob? My face, huh? Well, your whole body's kind of funny looking. Yeah? Well, you're kind of funny looking, Joe. Back and forth. Now, there may be some reasons you can explain somewhere in your story as to why this issue is back and forth and why they're kind of arguing about their face. It could be whatever it is in your story. But the point is, there's a one-upping going back and forth. Somebody says something nasty, other person says it nastier. And this is effective if it's a misunderstanding. Maybe one character was trying to sort of explain something that was sensitive, but they really felt, they believed, and they thought they were helping the other person. The other person didn't feel helped at all and just got upset. And then the original person said, hey, I was just trying to help you out. And so they said something nasty, and it grows and grows, and pretty soon you miss the original point, which was that helpful comment. Or that unhelpful comment that created this whole situation of one-upping. But you see, with one-upping, it's incredibly powerful. Because naturally, the other person's going to try to do better. Now, since one-upping in dialogue sometimes comes to physical blows, you maybe want to be careful as to how far you go, unless your point is that the fight broke out. But another thing in one-upping is to go to back 2, maybe 3 times. After that, people see where this is going. You've got enough conflict, and then you can push to some sort of resolution of that conflict in your story, whatever that is. If people are always in conflict and there's no resolution, that's not a good story either. There has to be some sort of resolution to conflict. But the conflict is to grow before that resolution. So the audience wants to have somehow people getting along here. But one-upping is very powerful. So one thing you can also do a little bit different, which is a great source of conflict. So far you've started with resistance in your dialogue. And that's created some good conflict right there. Do this. No, I won't. Come on, do it. I'll never do that. You got to do it now. No way in the world I'm going to do that. So yes, no, it goes back and forth. But as you can see, very quickly that conflict doesn't really grow anywhere. One-upping, on the other hand, great way. Hey, you're an idiot. Well, you're stupider. Well, you're stupider than that. Well, you're so dumb. And then back and forth it goes. Just each one getting nastier and nastier and nastier, perhaps because of some sort of misunderstanding. Maybe they're good friends, but somebody says something wrong and the other person immediately takes offense, and back and forth the conflict goes. So those are great sources of conflict. There's one other method of conflict you can use that's a little bit different, but that creates an instant conflict, and then you can grow and maybe one up from there. And that is a past event. A past event. Quite often in the middle of a conflict or an argument, somebody will bring up something that happened a long time ago that puts them into what they see as the right. They see that they're correct. What they're doing is right because of something happened a long time ago that kind of justifies their point of view. Well, quite often, this thing that they remember so clearly, the other person has no clue about. And that creates a conflict. So, if he says, Bob, you know, problem with you is that you never want to do the things I suggest. Oh yeah? Oh yeah, Joe? Well, I'll tell you what. Remember 3 years ago, November? Remember that? You had that brilliant idea to go out and to buy a whole bunch of shovels because it was going to snow. And we didn't get any snow. And I wasted all that money in shovels. I've still got shovels lying around my garage. It's a past event. Most likely, Joe's got no clue. Didn't remember anything about that. Bob brings it up, and all of a sudden the other say, well, that has nothing to do with this. Completely different situation. And then you can one up from there. By bringing up a past event that clearly shows the speaker in the right and the other person in the wrong, that creates an instant conflict. And quite often, people who bring up past events create a very quick conflict and a strong response to the other person who feels that they've been kind of undermined or attacked or sideswiped. Because they didn't have any, they had forgotten about the event entirely, and now it's being brought up to indicate how they're in the wrong. And that can lead to one-upping. That certainly can lead to resistance. It can develop all sorts of conflicts from there. And the power of a past event is that the audience kind of has probably been in this situation or seen other people in this situation where they're just kind of blindsided by something you just didn't expect. Like, what? Where'd you get that from? It was 10 years ago. Talking about right now. That creates those sort of conflicts. So a past event, although it seems like it's just one thing, but it can escalate very quickly. Because the moment somebody with a past event says, oh yeah, remember 5 years ago, October, I told you to go out and get shovels because it was going to snow, and you didn't, and you regret it, and you said to me, boy, I wish I'd gotten the shovels then. Past event can go back and forth, and that can escalate. So somebody remembers a past event to show the other person wrong, and then that person remembers some past event to show the other person wrong, and back and forth it goes. Just a great way to escalate and build that conflict. And so once you have this basis of conflict, particularly in a past event, you can really start to see it going back and forth and building and getting tense. As you may have witnessed in some situations where you might have been involved, you might have just been kind of a bystander. When past events come up, it gets pretty heated. And other past events come flying out. You may learn a lot about that person as they're going through their dialogue conflict. If you're going to tell a good story, you got to have dialogue. And if you have dialogue, it's There's got to be conflict in that dialogue. Just the narrative back and forth dialogue where nothing happens is boring. Has to be conflict. And there's 3 different types of conflict you can think about. One is simply resistance. Somebody says, do this. The other person says, no, I'm not going to. Now, resistance is great because it creates automatic conflict. It's the simplest of all conflicts. Yes, no. Come on, go to the movies. I don't want to go to the movies. Oh, come on, it's a great show. You'll love it. No, I've been in the movies before. I've never had a good time. And I just like to stay home and watch TV. You know, we'll watch it on TV. Hey, it's not playing on TV. You got to go to the movie house to see it. You can see it on the internet. It's no big deal. No, I don't want to see that. I want to see a big back and forth conflict. Just resistance. One person really wants something, the other person really doesn't, for whatever reason. It could be because they just want to get a little bit more time to think about it. It could be because they really, really don't want to do that. Whatever the resistance situation is, it goes back and forth. The challenge of dialogue conflict, though, is it really needs to build, and simple resistance becomes yes, no, and that can get boring. So in addition to resistance, you can consider a couple other methods of dialogue conflict. One of those is one-upping. One-upping, where somebody says something, and the other person feels they have to outdo that person, quite often used in insults. Somebody says something insulting or rude, or somebody takes it as insulting, the other person says, oh yeah, and they try to do something worse. And then the other person tries to be nastier than that, back and forth it goes. It's a natural building of conflict. Now, in the real world, one-upping quite often can lead to hitting. Fights break out over one-upping all the time because people just get nastier and nastier, and finally people just have to do something. So you may want to cool your one-upping before it gets too crazy. 2, 3 times at most back and forth can build the conflict. Remember, you're building the conflict to some sort of resolution. There has to be a conflict before you resolve it. So one-upping can be useful. And the last type of conflict to think about is a past event. A past event. This is where somebody mentions something, and the other person disagrees with them, and to prove their point that they're right and the other person is wrong, they'll bring up a past event. Something that happened in the past that shows that that person is in the wrong. Most times, the person who believes honestly that they're right has no recollection of this past event. Because for them, it was so long ago, they've completely forgotten about it. This creates instant conflict. They feel they've been kind of sandbagged, blindsided by this comment from nowhere about something which they think has nothing to do with the certain situation. So they may bring up a past event they have that contradicts the other person. And from there, it can be one-upping of past events. Oh yeah? Well, that happened at that time. Remember that? You weren't looking so great there? Oh yeah, well what about the time when you were that? That was pretty stupid. Back and forth. It goes building and escalating and growing conflict. Because if you want to really get people involved and interested in your speeches, you've got to tell stories. And to tell good stories, you need to have dialogue. Dialogue is back and forth. And if you just keep back and forth, just nothing going on, it becomes boring. Hey, great day. Yeah, it is a great day. Wonderful day. Beautiful day. Great day. Boring, boring speech. You've got a story with no speech with no conflict, you've got a boring story. So you want to have conflict. And to build and escalate this conflict is going to make your story. And once you start building and escalating conflict, you'll find this easy ability to create that story. And once you start building the conflict, you'll see it naturally goes to a certain place, and that'll help you develop and build that story out. More about how to resolve the story, where the story goes, what to do afterwards, the lesson the story is. All of this will come out of understanding more about the nature of that conflict and how that conflict occurs. So, if you want to develop good stories, create good conflict.